So this is the camera you see now, right? Yeah.
We can be seated, thank you.
Okay, so I'll switch the camera off now, thank you.
His Excellency, the President of the Republic, Cyril Ramaphosa, ministers and deputy ministers present, premiers, ambassadors, leaders of the business community,
For some reason, I cannot
sponsors,
hear
members of the media,
the
ladies
MC
and
from
gentlemen.
podium now.
Molweni, Dumelang,
Thank you.
Avusheni, Nimacheloni, Sanbolani, Lochani, Goeiemorgen, a very good morning and a very warm welcome to the second Sustainable Infrastructure Development Symposium. My name is Nzinga Kunta. I'm a business news anchor, and it's my great pleasure to be your program director today as government continues forging a social compact between itself, the private sector, labor, and civil society in the infrastructure space. We are all aware of the challenges that the South African economy faces. Within those challenges, though, is an opportunity to reset and to rebuild an economy that is inclusive and benefits all South Africans. An integral part of the economic reconstruction and recovery plan is infrastructure. Aggressive infrastructure investment is a priority intervention in South Africa's road to a reimagined economy. To this end, President Cyril Ramaphosa announced the establishment of the Infrastructure and Investment Office in the Presidency, and in May 2020, Cabinet confirmed the establishment of Infrastructure South Africa as part of approving South Africa's investment plan. There is a commitment and a plan to rebuild the country, brick by brick, road by road, and project by project. Let's begin then. Please may I ask the Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure, Minister Patricia de Lille, to please make her way to the stage to open the symposium. Can I please ask that we give her a round of applause as she makes her way to the stage? Thank you.
Good morning, Program Director. You look very beautiful today.
Thank you.
Your Excellency, Honorable President Cyril Ramaphosa, Honorable Ministers, Deputy Ministers and Premiers, members of the business community, development finance institutions, multilateral development banks, government departments and institutions, also representatives from our state-owned entities, representatives from the academic community, members of the media, the diplomatic corps, good morning. It is indeed a great honor for me this morning to welcome you, Mr. President, and all our esteemed guests to the second installment of the Sustainable Infrastructure Development Symposium 2021. Last year, on the 23rd of June, we held the inaugural SIDSSA, presenting a bold plan on infrastructure development in which government put out a strong call to work closer with the private sector to get the job done and implement much needed infrastructure delivery in our country. Despite the COVID-19 pandemic, we soldiered on and we got the construction industry back to work. This year, we are proud to be able to come back to the market with a new round of projects, which has been highly anticipated as the feedback from last year's event saw many companies asking for when the next round of projects will be presented. The SIDSSA 2021 is a platform created by government to continue forging the social compact between government, private sector, labor, civil society, and the infrastructure space. So a pipeline of 55 projects catalytic projects in South Africa has been unveiled to show how our country plans on developing infrastructure. The 50 new projects is being presented to the market are from various sectors valued at 595 billion with a funding gap of 441 billion. And collectively, the employment opportunities projected is around about 538,000. So this year's SIDSSA project pipeline focuses on the following areas: the potential public-private partnerships, the green economy, student accommodation, manufacturing and industrialization focus, social infrastructure, infrastructure fund projects that were approved by the infrastructure fund, an investment into the digital economy. Now, prior to SIDSSA 2021, we held a number of pitching sessions with the market to increase the supply, the quantum of projects towards bankability. The pitching sessions were also aimed at showcasing projects in South Africa's infrastructure portfolio for raising capital from national and international investors. The significance of infrastructure in development is also central to our economic reconstruction and recovery plan announced by President Ramaphosa in October 2020, in which infrastructure development was called the flywheel of the economy. As government, we are demonstrating the importance of investing in infrastructure development in order to create the conditions conducive for the crowding in effect by the private sector. I must also take this moment to thank the private sector partners for working with us over the past 2 years and on putting together a credible pipeline of infrastructure projects and also assisting us with project preparation to bring our projects to bankability stage. So also in terms of skills development, Infrastructure South Africa also partnered with a number of private sector associations to assist SIDSSA in the necessary portfolio management and also structuring skills of the projects under review. Approximately 20 professionals from the private sector were seconded to Infrastructure South Africa to support the acceleration of the infrastructure investment plan. We have further also engaged with the Infrastructure and Projects Authority in the United Kingdom, who provided training facilitated by the Commonwealth and Development Office on the 5K's business model for infrastructure and project delivery, as also recognized by the G20 and embedded in the UK Treasury. As South Africa, we have adopted the principles of the 5K's model. Given the challenges with regard to budget constraints, it is vital that government work with the private sector to invest in projects and infrastructure that will ensure inclusive growth and development in order to assist the recovery of our economy. Public infrastructure investment is central in achieving greater productivity and competitiveness, reducing spatial inequality, and supporting the emergence of a new job-creating sectors. It is thus one of the non-negotiables of transformation and inclusive growth. In addition, the construction of infrastructure generates employment and broad-based Black economic empowerment opportunities, further contributing to the goals goals of the National Development Plan. So SIDSSA is aimed at bringing together role players such as project sponsors, decision makers in government, financing institutions, international authorities, and academic institutions in a symposium that allows for the sharing of ideas. Everyone has been called together to have honest and constructive criticism, and most importantly, an environment that can follow for the forging of long-term relationships. Projects are considered also based on a high-level project criteria that includes the development impact, job creation, and contribution to economic growth, spatial inclusivity, and transformation. Honorable delegates, I will now give a progress report, what we've achieved since the last SIDSSA in June 2020 to this one. We presented the infrastructure investment plan, which comprises of 62 projects that were gazetted in terms of the Infrastructure Development Act of 2014. The gazetting of the 62 projects allows the projects to follow an expedited path to implementation as outlined in Schedule 2 of the Infrastructure Act. On the Infrastructure Fund, we have also operationalized the Infrastructure Fund in 2020, the 100 billion Infrastructure Fund, and we've established an investment committee chaired by myself, and so far we have met 3 times to consider some of the applications to the fund. Government innovatively established the Infrastructure Fund as seed funding with 100 billion rand over 10 years from government as a blended finance instrument to crowd in additional private sector finance to grow South Africa's infrastructure program. We have also established various governance structures, including the Investment Infrastructure Committee, which approved the pipeline of projects that lend themselves to blended finance. So the Infrastructure Fund manages a pipeline of more than 80 billion rand, providing the seed funding for these projects and crowding in investors through blended finance, innovative approaches. Also on project preparation, in November 2020, we held a project preparation roundtable with the private sector representative and development finance institutions. So these engagements have helped us as government to identify the regulatory impediments before final costly decisions are made. So while National Treasury provided 440 million rand to assist us with project preparation, we held this engagement to get a deeper understanding of the terms and conditions for project preparation facilities and donors to invest in project preparation. Another progress report is that we have established Infrastructure South Africa. And Infrastructure South Africa is headed by Dr. Kgosientsho Ramokgopa. And SIDSSA has been established as a single entry point for all infrastructure projects in the Infrastructure Investment Plan, which was also approved by Cabinet in May of 2020. So SIDSSA, under the capable leadership of Dr. Kgosientsho Ramokgopa, is the administrative arm responsible for monitoring implementation and assisting project owners to keep all the projects in the infrastructure investment plan moving, going forward all the time. So SIDSSA has been established also as a program within the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure, because we are sitting with a budget from government for SIDSSA, which effectively implements the Infrastructure Development Act provisions and is the central point of reference for strategic infrastructure planning, infrastructure development, and infrastructure alignment. Another achievement in the past 15 months, at SIDSSA last year, we said that the infrastructure investment plan will be underpinned by an anti-corruption strategy with an emphasis on preventing and detecting corruption before it occurs. So in May 2021, together with the SIU, we launched the Infrastructure Build Anti-Corruption Forum, along with other partners for multi-sectoral approach to clamp down on corruption. So the forum is placing special emphasis, like I said, on efforts to detect and prevent corruption. So during the first 3 months of the existence of the Anti-Corruption Forum, they focus its work on developing structures and mechanisms to support the operations of the forum. The forum includes the Hawks, the National Prosecuting Authority, construction industry bodies, as well as civil society organizations like Corruption Watch. Then, Honorable President, short progress on the implementation of the 62 SIPs that we went to the market last year. You will recall that Mr. President said last year that the infrastructure investment plan would see the country transform into a construction site. For me, it has been once in a lifetime opportunity to work on the infrastructure investment plan and visit all parts of the country to see these projects come to life and provide much needed jobs for our people and the construction industry. We have learned a lot as we went along, and we are more motivated than ever to continue pushing the implementation of infrastructure projects to create the conditions conducive for our economy to grow. A number of projects introduced at SIDSSA 2020 have already kicked off. Some are under construction, providing much needed jobs for our people. Infrastructure projects are vital to our economic recovery due to its multiplier effect on restoring economic growth, creating new jobs, and protecting livelihoods. So the sixth administration has created a seamless, integrated structure to coordinate all strategic infrastructure projects. So we have cross-crossed the country in launching these projects. Mr. President joined us, and two of them, the Mooi Kloof development and also in Lesikisiki last week with the bridges under construction. So in total, of the 62 projects presented last year at SIDSSA, 1/3 of the projects are in construction, and some of them are completed, such as the N1 Windberg interchange and the N1 Ventersburg to Kroonstad roads projects in the Free State. Also completed is the N2 Mutsunzini Toll Plaza in KwaZulu-Natal. Overall, 3 of the 62 gazetted projects are in the procurement stage, with the preferred bidders appointed. In SIP number 20 is the Emergency Risk Mitigation Independent Power Purchase Procurement Program for 200 megawatts, announced by Minister Kgosientsho a few months ago. Around 13 of the 62 gazetted SIDSSA are also scheduled to see construction starting within the next 12 months. The remaining projects are at various stages of preparation and feasibility. And also, for the sake of time, I will not go into the detail of all the progress on the SIDS, but if you visit the website of SIDSSA, we are giving a full update on progress of all 62 SIPs. One other achievement for the past year is the development of the draft National Infrastructure Plan 2050, which seeks to provide a long-term plan for infrastructure development. So NIP 2050 is part of the development of long-term plan for infrastructure for the country, and currently it is being approved by Cabinet for public consultation, and the public consultation ended at the end of September. We will now consider all the inputs from the public, and before the end of the year, we will present the final plan to Cabinet for approval. And again, I want to thank the reference group, the academics, and everybody involved in assisting us to put this plan together. In conclusion, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, we are hard at work to make infrastructure development a priority and to see it succeed. My emphasis is constantly on implementation, implementation, and implementation. The provision of superior quality infrastructure not only allows our economy to be more efficient, but it also has the effect of improving its productivity, raising the long-term growth rate and boosting international competitiveness. Most importantly, it changes the living experience of our communities who need decent infrastructure in their daily lives. Apart from ensuring that goods are transported, infrastructure ensures that all South Africans have access to running water, electricity, decent roads, and bridges. Later today, various sessions will take place with the ministers to further unpack some of the achievement. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, we can see that our work is cut out for us. We have a serious task to build South Africa back up better and ensure that we drive greater implementation of infrastructure development. And I'm sure with your help and with your input, we can do it. And leading the charge on all fronts to revive the economy is our Honorable President, His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa, and it's now my honor to call on Mr. President to deliver the keynote address. I thank you very much. Nkosi kakhulu, baie dankie, God bless.
Program Director, Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure, Ms. Patricia de Lille, ministers and deputy ministers who are here with us this morning, the Head of Infrastructure and Investment in the Presidency, Dr. Kgosientsho, Ramokgopa, heads of various corporations and development finance institutions, distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you all. I'm told that you've been all engaged in this whole process since yesterday, and I was informed that there was even a wonderful function last night. And when I sought to find out how that function went, I was told that I was asked not to ask too many questions. And they said the Las Vegas principle applies. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So I was told that what happened last night I would not be told about. We're here to talk about infrastructure, but I'd like us also to reflect on an icon in our country who played an unbelievable role in another form of infrastructure in our country, and it happens to be his birthday today. The Emeritus Archbishop Desmond Mpilo Tutu is celebrating his birthday. He is an architect of another form of infrastructure in our country, the ethical and the moral and the spiritual infrastructure. Let's give him a round of applause. And wish him well as he celebrates his birthday. I'm rather pleased to welcome you all to the second Sustainable Infrastructure Development Symposium of our country, known as SIDSSA. This symposium is an affirmation of the value of partnerships, of working together between government, financial institutions, business, development agencies, and communities towards the common goal of building our beautiful country, South Africa. Investment in infrastructure is an investment in people, but it is also an investment in the future of our country. For in the end, it is about improving the lives of ordinary people, providing much needed services to our people in the form of water, and clean water for that matter, affordable electricity, decent homes. It is about expanding the economic opportunities that should be available to all of us as South Africans, creating jobs, improving the competitiveness of businesses, and unleashing our people's potential. And infrastructure itself is transformational. It changes things, transforms things. It is about the far-reaching social change that can be achieved through either broadband in classrooms or integrated housing projects that are close to economic centers where our people live. It is also about small, medium enterprises, getting small-scale farmers to have access to markets, and large manufacturers that they should be able to easily and efficiently and competitively reach new export markets. Our inaugural symposium in June of last year had a dual mandate. Its mandate was to produce a credible infrastructure pipeline and also to find financing to support the delivery of the projects that we had identified in our pipeline. This year, SIDSSA 2021 is about implementing quality infrastructure and underlying quality infrastructure for development as well as recovery and inclusive growth. We've chosen these three focus areas because in many ways they capture our approach to infrastructure so that our approach is not scattered all over the place, it is focused and it is pointed. We're implementing quality infrastructure for development because it needs to contribute to the development of our society and make a sustainable difference in our people's lives, but also in the trajectory of our economic growth. We're implementing quality infrastructure for recovery because a massive infrastructure program is absolutely vital to the recovery of our economy in the aftermath of COVID-19. And it is for this reason it is an important plank of our ERRP. We're implementing quality infrastructure for inclusive growth so that we redress the economic imbalance between urban and rural. We develop townships into viable economic centers, and we reduce the cost of living of the poor. Every South African must experience the benefits of infrastructure investment and improved gross fixed capital formation that should happen in our country. Now, at SIDSSA 21, we are focused, firstly, on innovative approaches to projects with future revenue streams, and secondly, on new ways to finance crucial social infrastructure. And we have developed very creative and innovative ways of being able to develop social infrastructure. In the past, we used to talk about our desires, great desires of developing wonderful social infrastructure, and we often found that the lack of the balancing revenue streams for such social infrastructure then debilitated everything that we wanted to do, and everything just fell flat. But now, through innovation, and credit to Dr. Ramokgopa and those that he works with, and Minister Lille, and indeed the various other people in our various departments who participate collectively, we're coming up with very clever and innovative ways of structuring infrastructure projects. One of the new frontiers of infrastructure development is green energy, which has the potential not only to drive industrialization, but to establish a whole new industrial reality. And what is evolving in our country now is that more and more we are going ahead of the curve. We're not being reactive because the world landscape has changed. If you don't embrace green energy, if you don't respond to the climate change process that's underway in the world, you are left behind. I'm rather pleased that our infrastructure developments are now going ahead of this curve of embracing the climate change narrative and debate, and making sure that it is very much a part of what we are doing. And through this, a new world is opening to all of us. New technologies, new ways of doing things, and it's wonderful to hear as we develop infrastructure projects, to hear people talk about, we're building this on a green basis, this is a green building, and so on and so on. And to also hear industrialists and many big companies and small saying that as we produce these products, we have underpinned everything that we now do on the basis of green approaches, green energy, and our products are now becoming more and more green. The green hydrogen export special economic zone that we are going to develop at Bochubai with Sasol as an anchor investor is a major step towards realizing our potential to be a global leader in green hydrogen. And it was wonderful, the Sasol people may want to know, it was wonderful 2 days ago when I sat down with President Kgosientsho of Namibia, and we started talking about this type of project and how this project in Bochubai is going to bring the two countries together, to get both countries to approach this type of project on a joint basis so that we work together, all developing a project that is going to have enormous industrial benefits for both South Africa and Namibia. It points to a future where tens of gigawatts of renewable energy feed electrolysis at massive scale, electrolyzers at massive scale, producing the hydrogen power fuels of the future is going to happen. And we stand ready to be a major exporter in this market, to use the hydrogen to rapidly decarbonize our existing industries and attract industrial investment from across the globe seeking to meet new standards of green power in the production process. The Bochubai SEZ will host such mass-scale production, but will also secure and source green hydrogen volumes from emerging players such as Mahlaku, which is a women-led company that is going places, led by the women of our country. And it was a joy to listen to a Mahlaku, to Sasol, to also Anglo-American, describing how they are going to continue or they are going to play in this space. Now, this shows that we are now getting more and more ahead of the curve. And as we do so, this complements in many ways the Hydrogen Valley project being spearheaded by Anglo and Sasol's partnership with the Gauteng provincial government to create decarbonized industrial power grids and also supply lines for hydrogen-based green aviation fuel. A number of projects, as Minister de Lille was saying, are also underway throughout the country. Now, many of our people in this country often say, where are these infrastructure projects? We don't see them. They are underway. And last year we spoke about projects amounting to about 340 or so billion rand, and I think Dr. Ramokgopa will outline the greater details. Now, a number of those are now under implementation. A good 33% of them, amounting to about 119 billion rand rather, are already underway. They are already in construction, about to get into construction, or at the tender stage, meaning that there is progress and we are moving ahead. Just a few days ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, I visited the Msikaba Bridge near Lusikisiki in the Eastern Cape, which forms part of the N2 Wild Coast Road project, a massive project that is being funded, yes, by our government through SANDRAL, and SANDRAL is doing amazing work, just creating one of the bridges that's going to be possibly one of the longest bridges on the African continent. This project will stimulate significant new investment in the Eastern Cape. It will connect rural communities to urban centers, but also promote inclusive economic development. The N2 Wild Coast Road network is one of our government's strategic integrated projects which aim to catalyze economic growth. It is underway and it should be completed in 2024. Another critical area is the development and management of the country's water infrastructure. Water, as we all know, is our most valuable natural resource. We live in a water-scarce country, and much work is happening in this area as well. It is necessary to sustain life, to grow our food, to maintain human health, and to enable the growth of our economy, because it is water that powers our economy. We've established the Water Program Management Office, jointly owned by the Department of Water and Sanitation and Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs. We are strengthening the preparation and planning of municipal water infrastructure so that it can access blended finance solutions positioned under the Infrastructure Fund. Wherever one goes throughout our country, communities, ordinary citizens, continue to raise the issue of water. But similarly, companies also who operate at that level also raise the issue of water. So we are fast-tracking the establishment of the National Water Resource Infrastructure Agency and the review of the raw water pricing strategy to ensure effective pricing and cost-reflective tariffs. Another key thematic focus area of SIDSSA 21 is to bridge urban and rural divide through infrastructure. Now, with a rural population of around 18 million in our country, it is vital that we increase fixed capital investment in the rural areas. For in the past, we've tended to focus largely on the urban areas. And the need for development in our country so that no area is left behind and no community is left behind and no one is left behind is that we must also now focus on our rural areas. Through this, we aim to improve rural accessibility and establish linkages to formal economic opportunities in urbanized areas. The National Development Plan says that the ratio of gross fixed capital formation to GDP should be at least at 30%. Now, following the recent recalculation of our GDP, this ratio is currently just below 14%, which is not desirable for an economy of our size. Underspending on public infrastructure budgets compounds this problem. That is why Infrastructure South Africa has drafted a National Infrastructure Plan 2050 that sets the vision for what needs to be achieved in public infrastructure and the policy stances required to get there. Now, let us not punish ourselves, because it does happen that countries do fall behind when it comes to infrastructure. Even countries as big as the United States, which is the biggest economy in the world, have found recently that they have fallen behind when it comes to infrastructure. And it is for this reason that even President Biden has committed a lot of resources in infrastructure. We may not have as much resources as they have, but we have the vision, we have the will, we have the intent to ensure that infrastructure becomes, yes, as Minister de Lille says, the flywheel of our economy, so that it fuels and powers our economic growth. Now, the focus is on capital investment in the large network sectors of energy, water, transport, and the digital economy. At least a third of the capital required for this infrastructure should come from the private sector. We recognize that the current policy and legal framework for public infrastructure is fragmented and is not really workable, with many overlapping institutional roles and poor accountability. Now, in the coming year, what we would like to see is that Infrastructure South Africa will be proposing amendments to the Infrastructure Development Act, including new regulations and amendments to other legislation, including the existing public-private partnership regulations. The regulatory framework intends to clarify the various roles and responsibilities amongst all organs of state in the preparation, as well as the approval, as well as the important area of procurement and delivery of large infrastructure programs, or projects and programs, whether they are designed as public-private partnerships or the direct physical expenditure items or programs. Now, over a year ago, the Infrastructure Fund became operational and is already engaged with a project pipeline in areas such as student housing, which is a major need in our country, water and sanitation, social housing, and digital projects. We are also making progress with the establishment of the Social Infrastructure Fund, which will initially prioritize education infrastructure. We are blending the skills as well as the experience of seasoned and retired professionals with Infrastructure South Africa staff to develop the next generation of capable public servants who are tasked with the delivering of ambitious infrastructure projects. Infrastructure development at a massive and innovative scale is critical for the economic development of our country, and inclusive growth and shared prosperity really finally depends on it. I'd like to thank the sponsors and all participants, including the multilateral development banks and funding institutions, the development finance institutions who are here, the commercial banks as well, and organized business and infrastructure-oriented organized bodies as well. I thank them, as I've named them in this way, for contributing their time and other resources for the success of SIDSSA 21. And we look forward to an enduring relationship that will propel our economic recovery, that will also drive inclusive growth and build a better life for all the people of our country. Some of you may recall the pledge that was made by our forebears in 1955 when they drafted the Freedom Charter. And they said in that pledge, let all those who love their country commit themselves. And they said, we shall fight for the freedoms that they had identified in the Freedom Charter. And they said, we shall fight for these freedoms side by side throughout our lives until we have attained our liberty. Now, as infrastructure plays such a critical role in the life of any country, but more especially our country's life, I'd like to say that we should all say that as we sit here, we are determined to develop South Africa. And we now say we love and we are committed to building South Africa brick by brick, borrowing what Nzinga said, road by road, repeating what she said, highway by highway, that's now me, bridge by bridge, dam by dam, school by school, clinic by clinic, building by building, smart city by smart city, broadband network by broadband network, project by project. All this we shall do, we should say, side by side, as we turn South Africa into a building site, and as we develop our beautiful country into a thriving country and a growing economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President, for the context that you provided about how infrastructure impacts every aspect of our lives, and an insight into the plans you have to improve, among other things, the green economy, revenue streams, social infrastructure, and blended finance in the water infrastructure, ICT, and energy space, among other things. The vision and the will indeed are there. Infrastructure is so important to the economic reconstruction and recovery plan that a special office within the presidency was created with the sole mandate to consolidate infrastructure and meet South Africa's investment target of 1.2 trillion rand. After the first Sustainable Infrastructure Development Symposium was convened, a pipeline of 62 projects were announced and gazetted, as Minister de Lille mentioned. Let's find out more on this and what we can look forward to in the future in terms of next level infrastructure, special economic zones, and what projects are to be invested in. Please may I ask Dr. Kgosientsho Ramokgopa, the Head of Infrastructure South Africa, to make his way to the stage to give us an update and what we can look forward to in the future. And Minister, can I please ask you to use this podium that I'm standing on? Thank you.
Is it working? Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Nzinga, and good morning, Honorable President, Excellency President Ramaphosa, ministers, and just to special acknowledgements to Minister de Lille, Minister Ngugubele for the tremendous support that they've offered in providing leadership and stewardship to the exercise of the work of SIDSSA. I think in the prosecution of our work, they've been able to provide the necessary guidance. And also just to thank our partners for making this possible. Premier Sol, thank you very much for gracing us, and other premiers if they are in the room. Deputy ministers, and also let me greet you all in your eminence. So we're trying to answer just 2 questions in 9 substantive slides. What are those questions? The first one is the question that the President raised. So what is different? We had the inaugural session. Now is the second installment of SIDSSA. So what are those lessons that would have been accumulated over a period of time, and what are the kind of improvements that we are proposing to ensure that we accelerate this agenda of infrastructure delivery? So that's the first question that we are answering. And then the second one, Minister Lille has answered it comprehensively, but I'll just provide just a macro picture so that there's a greater level of appreciation. That is just to provide a balance sheet of the kind of progress that we have made since the inaugural SIDSSA. It's important because we want to ensure that we reinforce the credibility of the state. So if you are to generate or derive a believability index, we want to rank very high on that index because it's a function of the degree to which we are able to live up to our promises. So those are the 2 questions that we are answering. Mr. President, we know that there's a few things that have happened since the inaugural SIDSSA, and the President does refer to those in his main address. So there has been a pivoting, if you like, in global affairs in relation to how countries see their roles in the economy. So we know that the major industrialized countries of the North have seen that the state can play a catalytic role in the recovery effort. The President does make reference to the ambitious infrastructure interventions that are initiated by the Biden administration. Of course, it's still going through approval processes there of the 2 houses. And we know that the European Union has also come out and announced a very ambitious and bullish intervention to help the economy to recover, and key to that is infrastructure. And then there's also the Belts and Roads Initiative that is led by Xi Jinping in China. Of course, this was introduced in 2012. But the point we are communicating there is just the significance of infrastructure in the recovery effort. So the message there is that there's some degree of pivot in relation to policy outlook of the major industrialized countries in the world, in that they are significantly moving towards Keynesian policies, that is state intervention, to ensure that there's sustained and rapid recovery, of course, with some degree of industrialization. Of course, they are at a different level of industrialization there. So I think we thought it's important that we reflect on that to indicate that there are major trends that are happening in the world, and we are not alone. So in the quest for the recovery effort, infrastructure is central to those efforts. And then the second one, of course, they might not be able to see what the Bloomberg had done some study, essentially just asking captains of industries just to get their appetite and their projections and what their intentions are going into the future, a window of 1 year to 3 years. What are the kinds of areas that they are looking to invest in? So you can see that the infrastructure features high on the agenda of some of these investments. So what is the point we are trying to make is that if we position infrastructure, the kind of projects that are properly packaged, there's a big pool of global liquidity that can be directed towards supporting some of the infrastructure projects, programs that we are initiating here. And of course, the President did unveil the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan, and the plan makes the point that if we're to succeed in the delivery of those 6 interventions, we are likely going to grow the economy by 3% growth in relation to GDP, and I think there's significant consensus amongst the other players who are evaluating the performance of our economy. The OECD also makes the projections around what is possible. The World Bank also makes suggestions of what is possible. So the point we are making is that everyone has come to acknowledge that the infrastructure is key to this recovery effort. And then we have done some degree of analysis, President, Ministers, just to try and understand what has been the impact of the investments, infrastructure investments that has been made in the South African economy over a period of time. So we've done a longitudinal study. Of course, the start of that timeline is 1994. That timeline is significant because it represents the moment of the victory of the democratic project. So anything after 1994, essentially those are policy choices of a democratic state. So we tried to do a computation and just understand what has been the spatial manifestations of those infrastructure investments. And then we have found that there's high levels of concentration of investments in your metro province of Gauteng. So you can see the metro, so the deep green essentially communicates the concentration of investments, and then as it gets lighter, the concentration, of course, reduces. And in your red areas, those are provinces that are seeing nothing or little or nothing of investments in those areas. So it's important that whatever we do, we must seek to reconfigure that picture, we must re-alter that picture so that everyone in any part of the country should be able to enjoy the democratic dividend. So in doing that, there has to be some concerted effort to ensure that there's investments in those spaces, especially focusing on the network industries, as Minister de Lille and the President has mentioned, because industry will locate in areas where there's good quality road so that they're able to access the market from centers of primary production, especially your producers in those areas. You are able to set up pack houses, do some degree of beneficiation or value addition for as long as there's a consistency of supply. I'm talking water and energy. So it's important that we focus our attention in investing in those areas. And then we also just did an analysis just to understand what is the percentage of the population that is within 2 kilometers of what we call in engineering all-weather road. In colloquial terms, a road that is surface, if you like, a road that is tarred. And you can see that Gauteng has got over 90%, close to 90% of the population is within 2 kilometers of a surface road. And that should not come as a surprise because of two reasons. Just the geographic, the footprint of the province is smaller. I think it's 1.2% of the total land mass of the country, but it accounts for about 25% of the population. So it means that the densities are higher. The second reason why Gauteng enjoys that is because it's the heartland or the heartbeat of the economy. That's where you find the concentration of your metros, and you know that they are sitting on big budgets, and therefore they are able to rapidly roll out basic infrastructure such as municipal roads. So it shouldn't come as a surprise. But you can see that more than half of the population in the country, or more than half of the provinces in the country, they have their population living within more than 2 kilometers of an all-weather access road. So you can see that some provinces is up to 30%. So 30%, 70% of the population is outside that parameter of 2 kilometer road. So it just communicates the extent to which people are able to access services. So we use all weather because during rainy seasons, it means that people are not able to go about doing their basic chores, going to school, going to the nearest clinic, accessing social grants, because they are not, the roads are not passable. So that's the slide, it communicates that message. And then the second message from this slide is what the President referred to. So we know now that as a result of the rebasing of the economy, as a result of COVID, that the gross fixed capital formation is far from reaching the levels as advocated in the NDP, that of being 30% of GDP. So we're sitting, I think, at about 14.9%. So what does that translate in rand value terms? Because percentages sometimes don't succeed in conveying the message. So what that means, Mr. President, is that there has to be an additional 708 billion rands in infrastructure investment year on year going into the future to improve our prospects of achieving 30% of gross fixed capital formation being a percentage of GDP. So that's the scale, the enormity of the investments that are expected in that space. And remember that the expectation is that a third of that must come from the public sector, because it will then catalyze and crowd in private sector participation. So a third of that, essentially you are talking anything up to, I think, around 240 billion rand in additional investments in the infrastructure space. So that's the point that we want to make, just for us to have an appreciation of the scale of the investments that are required. The President spoke at length about the economic reconstruction and recovery plan, but we want to lift two interventions that are opposite to this symposium. The first one is that the President says we need to unlock 1 trillion rands of infrastructure investments over the next 4 years. So juxtapose that with the articulation earlier on that as a result of COVID, we need an additional 240 billion rand coming from the public sector, and the rest, the 2/3, will come from the private sector. So essentially what it means is that over the 4 years, indeed, you'll need 1 trillion rands of additional investment. So what is the point we are making is that when the President reads out this, shares these figures to the nation, they are evidence-based, they are not arbitrary. So essentially they are derived from science. So we thought that you must have a better appreciation of the origins of 1 trillion rands. It's not an imagination, it's derived from science. And that's why we want to galvanize private sector to work with us to address those questions. And then the other one is around accelerating the industrialization of the economy, broadening the manufacturing base, and in this way you are able to absorb the supply side. So that's essentially the context. So as I conclude, I want to show you, just to juxtapose, what is it that we can read out of this. So Minister de Lille makes the point that in the inaugural symposium, the raw projects that we received, when I say raw, it means that we had not treated them, we had not evaluated them, we have not subjected them to some degree of evaluation. So we got about 277 projects from the various project sponsors. So this could be the 3 spheres of government or SOEs, and some of them came from the private sector. And when we did the deeper analysis, we were able to discover that about 68% of these projects were in early preparation stage. So they are either in conceptualization or they are at pre-feasibility. So they don't enjoy the benefit of hard data to make a strong commercial case for this project. So there was not a compelling case. So it's an area that requires improvements going into the future. Because if we were to get a significant proportion of these projects to be post-feasibility, if you understand the project value chain, conceptualization until decommissioning. So if you get to a lot of these projects are post-feasibility, they are at the stage of bankability, essentially enjoying the confidence of being presented to the debt capital market for possible funding. If we get a large percentage of those to be in that category, or even advanced stages of project life cycle, then we should be able to deliver this project quicker. So last year, 68% of these 277 were at early business case. This year now we are sitting at 130 projects that have been submitted. So you need to understand it's an improvement. 277 to 130 is an improvement. Let me explain to you why that is an improvement. It's because it means that now project sponsors have got an appreciation and understanding of the quality of project that needs to be submitted for them to enjoy favor to be taken to the next stage. So it means project sponsors are spending a lot of time in project preparation so that the quality of the projects that are coming through are of such a nature that it allows us to graduate them to the next stage. So there's an investment upstream of these projects to make sure that we are able to achieve that. And then now we know that of these 130, 60% of them are still in that early business case. So it's an improvement of 8 percentage points. So it means that 8 percentage point improvement on the quality of the pipeline that we are receiving. So, Mr. President, ministers, we are likely going to graduate these projects quicker. Remember that once they get this financing, they must still run the procurement process. It must be transparent, it must be competitive, value for money. Those are constitutional prescripts in relation to projects that gets to be financed through the national fiscus. And then we think that we can make significant improvements. The first one, projects that are housing in nature, social housing, and the big retail developments, they can enjoy a lot of support from public sector if we are to invest in bulk financing, because that's a responsibility of municipalities. We know that the balance sheet of many municipalities have deteriorated. So we are working with National Treasury. We are convinced now, working with DG Mukhajani and Minister Godongwane, that we have found a solution. So we're likely going to be graduating a lot of these projects and then get them to financial close so that we get to implement them. And then the next one is what Minister de Lille referred to, the President touched on it, was that last year we presented 50 of the projects that were funded through the debt capital market. So the question is, what happened to those projects? So I'm happy to announce that 29 of those projects, they are either completed, and let me explain. When I say completed, you might ask, but it's only a year. How is that possible? It's because those that have been completed were going into the second phase of their construction. So these were brownfields developments. So, and some of them required refinancing. And these were largely transport projects that were sitting with Sanral. So we're able to complete a significant proportion of those. And then in the 29 also sits those projects that are currently in construction as I speak to you. So there's going to be an accelerated effort just to indicate to the country where these projects are. The President makes an important point to say that a few people beginning to doubt this infrastructure build program. Of course, it's not happening at every corner of the country, so it's important that we are able to expose the rest of the country where these projects are happening. And the President did make mention that he was at one of these projects about 2 weeks ago. And also what sits in the 29 are projects that are now in procurement. And the one area that requires improvement, and I know that Minister Gungubele and de Lille are working on that, is on the project sponsors to accelerate the procurement process without undermining the tenets of transparency, value for money, and competitiveness. Some of them have been through a process of evaluation. I think I know of about 3 projects. It's about 12 months now. It's untenable, so it's important that we're accelerating that. So in rand value terms, what does it mean? So we raised 340 billion from the debt capital markets through the inaugural seats. 119 billion of that is now in action. So that accounts is a rand value of those 29 projects. And then the rest, the remainder, if you like, the delta, we're still working on those projects. And when we come to the next iteration of the seats, we'll account for that so that there's an appreciation of the kind of progress that we are making. So these are some of the projects that are happening. So Minister de Lille has spoken at a large extent about that. And then in conclusion, what are we doing differently in these seats? So in addition to improving the quality of the projects that are coming through, there's a few things that we're attending to. The first one, Mr. President, is around bulk infrastructure financing. I made the point that it's an exclusive domain of the municipalities. And you know that the balance sheet is deteriorating, the fiscal headspace has been obliterated. So it's undermining, sterilizing this project. It's undermining the ability of private sector to participate in that space, because if there's no water, if there's no sufficient supply of energy, if the road network is not sufficient or the capacity is not improved, private sector is unlikely to move, but also some of the departments, especially human settlements, is unlikely to move. So like I said, we have found a solution of how we can finance bulk infrastructure. The second one is around social infrastructure. If you look at the pipeline that we introduced the previous year, the inaugural seat, there's absence of social infrastructure. Cabinet took a dim view and said that there has to be greater investments into social infrastructure, because that helps us to to meet the constitutional injunctions of universal access amongst the many. It gives us an opportunity to ensure that we are able to invest in those rural and less affluent provinces, and in that way we should be able to make it possible for private sector to invest in those spaces. So working with some of the leading pension funds, we've been able to find an instrument. Of course, working with the DBSA, we'll be announcing that financing instrument. Essentially what the private sector says is that part of their mandate is to invest in what we call ESG, investing environmental, social, and governance. Really the expectation is around, it's not about the commercial returns, but the impact that these investments are making in the economy, in society, and social infrastructure is an excellent candidate to benefit from that. So we have designed that instrument. So we are happy to say to ministers in the country that is going to come on board. And then the last one, just to reflect there, is around the green hydrogen. The president has spoken about it. So if you like, it's a 21st century oil. So it's got the potential of making South Africa a modern day version of Africa's own Saudi Arabia, but anchored on green hydrogen. I'm sure there's going to be a panel discussion that is going to surface what some of these opportunities are. So we need to achieve first mover advantages. Of course, there are people who are already moving. It's not first mover in the classical sense. Chile is an excellent candidate. Australia is making forays into those spaces. So it's important that we work with the private sector to exploit those opportunities. We've got natural advantages, issues of location quotient. The Northern Cape has positioned itself as a renewable complex of the continent, not just the country, because of the irradiation level, the amount of land that is there, but of course the stewardship, the leadership of Premier Saul and his executive, more progressive and receptive to some of these ideas and working with private sector. Yesterday, Sasol announced that relationship with the Northern Cape. So that's really something that is coming on stream, something that is new. So we've expanded the scope. It's not only the commercially viable project, the social projects. We are packaging instruments around the bulk infrastructure financing, and then we're looking at new frontiers. And then what is the size of the pipeline in these seeds? President, so these are 55 projects. Minister de Lille has referred to them with the potential to generate about 538,000 jobs. These 55 now, only 40% of these projects are at early preparation stage, so 60% are advanced. So what it means is that we stand in good state for us to graduate these projects, and we should be able to, in the next iteration of the seed, you will see that they would have moved rapidly. So moving with speed to ensure that we graduate as many projects as possible to support that agenda that the president is leading of ensuring that the economy recovers and we reconstruct that in the process. Ownership and production patterns, there must be, if you like, a qualitative transformation of those ownership and productive patterns. And then I did make mention around what we're doing with regards to social infrastructure. If you look at the schools as an example, at the current rate of financing through the fiscus is going to take us up to 68 years to extinguish the backlogs that are in the schools infrastructure space. So we're talking about 3,225 schools or some form of infrastructure that is associated with the schools. So at the current rate of financing, it's going to take us 68 years, but working with the private sector now that we've got a war chest to ensure that we finance this, we're able to bring it closer, and kids in many parts of the country can enjoy the demographic or the democratic dividend, so that we are able to meet the constitutional injunctions of universal access and also the requirements of the aspirational targets of the NDP when it talks about good quality education. And then just in conclusion, the big frontiers, what are the next agenda? The next areas of opportunity going into the future. Green hydrogen, the president has spoken at length about that. There's industrial cannabis, ministers they are working on on that. Minister Tokodi Diza is leading that agenda. The issue of ESG financing, I've spoken about what that is, that big pool of liquidity that is directed at ensuring that the investments are impactful. So in the design of our project, we'll make it possible that they become candidates to draw on this big pool of funding. And then the SEZ, so DTIC is leading that, the IDC is leading that. We're working very closely with Mr. Lionel October there, the IDC, just to see how best we reconfigure or we use the instrument of the SEZ to catalyze growth. And there's a number of these projects that we are working on. One of those projects that has come through the pipeline series is a pyramid hub, the confluence of the N1 and the N4 here in Pretoria. They present some of the most pristine opportunities going into the future. So we're working with the IDC in that space and the DTIC. And if you look at the rapid economic development of China, in the main, it has been anchored around the exploitation of SEZ, and then there are issues of the digital economy, the next generation. So we're working on the Center of Excellence. Our view is that the policy choices must be evidence-led. The sixth administration is doing exactly that. So we're building a body of knowledge, if you like, within Infrastructure South Africa to influence that space. Obviously, the principals will make the policy choices, but we give them the kind of data and evidence that is necessary to enable them to make those choices going into the future. We're working on a prioritization framework that should be known across all public sector. So when we say we want to graduate the project, what is the criteria that is being used so that there's some degree of universality, at least within the public sphere, on how we treat projects, how we evaluate them, so that there's predictability in relation to whether projects will graduate or not. And then there are issues of policy and regulation. Operation Vulindlela is doing sterling work there, led by the presidency and the National Department of Treasury. We know some of the reforms in those spaces, especially the energy space. I mean, those come highly recommended, and they've done significant impact in this space. And then there's issues of portfolio management, just aggregating the capacity that resides in the state. There's significant capacity. Yes, it's not sufficient. It has been hemorrhaged over time, but I think there can be some degree of aggregation. And in this way, once we concentrate those skills and we're able to provide transversal, if you like, support across all of government, we are likely going to graduate these projects going forward. So that's, in a nutshell, really what distinguishes SIDS 21 from SIDS 20, just sharing with you at the macro level the kind of progress that has been made. As Minister de Lille has indicated, you can visit our website and there will be a much more granular articulation of the kind of progress that has been made, and we also get to expand on those 55 projects so that if there's additional interest in relation to financing going forward, you can see what the pipeline looks like, but it also signals the intention of the country in relation to positioning infrastructure, as the President calls it, as a flywheel for recovery and reconstruction. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Ramokgopa, Head of Investment and Infrastructure at the Office of the Presidency, for setting the scene and updating us on where we are, being that an additional investment of 708 billion rand per annum will be required if the gross fixed capital formation target of around 30% of GDP is to be achieved. The importance of public and private partnerships, over 500,000 jobs set to be created from the 55 projects in the pipeline, and again, the importance of green energy and opportunities in hydrogen. So, the draft National Infrastructure Plan 2050 has been prepared by Infrastructure South Africa, working with sector specialists and stakeholders. The plan's been described as critical to South Africa achieving its long-term social and economic goals. The NIP 2050 recommends strengthening the performance of state-owned enterprises, sector-specific regulations, state capacity, and private participation in public infrastructure and delivery management. So, what's the future of infrastructure in South Africa? And what's the future role of infrastructure as a strategic landscape? To answer this, I'm joined on stage by Professor Chris Ardendorff from the University of Johannesburg, Mr. Leslie Marsdorp, who will be joining us virtually from Beijing, Ms. Priscilla Malebane from Sasol, Mr. Reginald Demana from the IDC, and Mr. Serame Tabukong from Telkom. Professor Ardendorff, if I can just ask that we stay seated and we have a panel discussion, and then later on we can have some more questions. My apologies about the misunderstanding. Mr. Demana, perhaps I'll start with you. The Industrial Development Corporation is targeting 8 billion rand in new and renewable energy projects in the near term. Tell us about them and how they play into this vision of the NIP 2050. From the IDC, do we have a representative on stage? Did you hear the question? Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Very good morning.
Please repeat the question.
All right. The IDC is targeting 8 billion rand in renewable energy projects. Can you tell us more about them and how they play into the vision of the National Investment Plan 2050, Infrastructure Plan 2050?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, especially a warm welcome to the President and members of the Executive, and Machironi. The IDC has identified the energy value chain and related infrastructure as a key enabler to industrial development. And I think for us, we want to respond to 4 specific challenges. One is energy security. Put simply, how do we respond to load shedding and load reduction? The second one is energy efficiency. How do we manage the cost trajectory of administered input prices, especially with related to electricity, and to continue to make operations, especially in the mining sector, more cost competitive? The third one is decarbonization. Again, we realize that as an export-dominated economy, we need our products to continue to access export markets. And how do we maintain that when faced with carbon border taxes or carbon border tax adjustments being introduced globally? And the fourth one is climate change and the need to meet our net zero emission targets. So with those 4 challenges, we believe that our response to energy infrastructure development must be very aggressive. We have therefore targeted in the very near short term 8 billion rand of pipeline projects in renewable energy projects. And that is 8 billion that helps to unlock further private sector investment with multiplier effects in the areas of 5 to 10. With our 8 billion, we are able to fund the high-risk elements of such projects, mezzanine finance, BEE finance. We are able to then drive transformation and inclusive growth in the economy. We are very encouraged to see that there is a bid window 5, 6, and 7 that have been released. And we are participating as an institution, supporting 27 of 100 projects in bid window 5. And we intend further increasing that participation as we proceed. We look at solar, we look at wind, and of course we look at combination of these technologies, including battery storage. But most importantly, we want to drive localization of components. We cannot continue importing most inputs into these projects whilst our own manufacturing base is being eroded. So that's a key focus for the IDC in renewable energy right now. Having said that, we need to also maintain some level of investment into existing base load power. Unfortunately, that means fossil fuels. We believe to ensure a base load power that is consistent and reliable in the short term, and balancing the need for a fair and just transition, that is a responsible way of managing the transition to a cleaner, greener economy. And that's why you see the pipeline we have and the capital allocation we have in the short term. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Leslie Marsdorp is joining us from Beijing. If I can ask our technical staff to please bring him up. A very good morning to you, Mr. Marsdorp. Just talk to us about how the New Development Bank's objective is to finance infrastructure and sustainable development projects in the BRICS and other developing nations. What kind of infrastructure projects will deliver the type of growth that's needed, that's been spoken about here today?
Thank you very much, Program Director, for having me, and good morning South Africa time to the President and all ministers present. Let me start out by saying that I'd like to just concentrate on three aspects in my brief remarks. The first one is just to give a snapshot of what the bank, the BRICS New Development Bank, have achieved now in the short 6 years of our existence. Two, to give a sense of just what are the 2-3 key priorities for the future, and then to give a bit of a report back to the President and ministers and social partners present about what we have done over the last 12 months since the last SID gathering. With respect to the overview of the bank, and it's just for 1 minute to take a trip down memory lane, when I arrived in Shanghai 6 years ago, literally in a makeshift office with only 5 employees being the 5 members of management, and a very small secretariat provided by the Chinese government at the time, the bank was a complete startup. Today, the bank has approved 79 projects to the tune of $31 billion. Of that $31 billion, $5.4 billion represents real infrastructure projects that have been approved in South Africa. These projects are spread throughout various sectors. Transport, we have a large number of airports. We are building bridges, roads, etc. With respect to the energy portfolio, we have a substantial green energy portfolio which comprises of solar energy. It also comprises of wind as well as hydro power. And to make it a little bit more concrete, we are in the process of building and upgrading 15,700 kilometers of roads. We have, or in the process of constructing 2,800 megawatts of renewable energy. And to make that more real, we'll be able to power up the entire Cape Town as well as Port Elizabeth with that 2,800 megawatts of power. We're in the process of building 850 bridges throughout the BRICS countries. And over the last year, we have approved and disbursed $9 billion specifically to help the BRICS countries combat the impacts of COVID and also boost the economic recovery. There are 3 priorities going forward in terms of what the bank will do next. The first one is that we are now expanding beyond the BRICS countries. You might know when the bank was established, the 5 BRICS countries pledged to put in $2 billion of equity. And over time, there was always a commitment to open up the bank to become more of an emerging markets global enterprise. We have just admitted Bangladesh, United Arab Emirates, as well as Uruguay joining the BRICS nations. As this process of expansion unfolds, eventually the 5 BRICS countries will have 11% ownership in the bank each. And so the BRICS countries with 55% block will always control the institution into the future, but we will become a much bigger global institution. The next key aspect of the priorities going forward, and the President and the Minister De Lille already made reference to it, is the big shift towards sustainability and specifically climate finance. We intend in our new strategy that we will announce in a matter of months, will codify that 40%, almost half of all of our development lending and exposure into the future will be in the sustainable infrastructure arena. The third key focus is the pivot away from just direct lending, which is what we have done in the past, lending towards governments, state-owned enterprises, to using our balance sheet more in a way, as the Minister also referenced earlier on, to crowd in more private sector money. Private sector capital is at the heart of how the development agenda will be accelerated. So our plan is to increase our exposure to the private sector to 30%. At the moment, it is below 10%. So the total commitment to the public sector will be around 70% and 30% then to the private sector. And then finally, I'd like to make reference to the commitment towards the low carbon future and net zero, which the President and several speakers have also already referenced. The key point to make here is that there will be significant transitional challenges, which we as a bank hope to partner with the government of South Africa, as well as with social partners, to ensure that we achieve what is generally referred to as just transition. South Africa, as you know, played a leadership role in COP15 in Paris to introduce the concept of just transition, and we're often cited as having played that leadership role in the global social dialogue. However, at this stage, we have not yet come up with a forward-looking, action-oriented plan which sets out how are we going to deal with the potential stranded communities, stranded workers, stranded assets as a result of the very strong coal-fired power stations and coal-related jobs we have, especially in Mpumalanga. One of the great advantages in dealing with this challenge is the fact that it is very concentrated. It is literally 4 municipalities in Mpumalanga where more than 70% of the coal industry is located. So we do have an enabling environment to work with. As a bank, we hope to partner very closely with the government in dealing with this significant challenge to ensure that we have retraining, investment in new industries. And the President already made reference to some of the new industries of the future, specifically green hydrogen, whether it's battery storage, renewable energy. All of these are sectors that many of the BRICS countries are investing in quite heavily. And then finally, I'd like to just give a short report what we have done over the last year. I mentioned that the bank committed $2 billion to each of the 5 BRICS countries. We disbursed last year to South Africa on the 20th of July, the first emergency COVID response loan, and that loan was focused on assisting the public health infrastructure in South Africa to minimize the spread of the virus and also to reduce the impact, the economic impact. So we divided the first loan into 2 components. One was focused on the health related infrastructure, procurement of PPE, ventilator distribution, and so on. And a portion of that first loan was also devoted to beefing up the social safety net, especially increasing the amount of grants to vulnerable individuals and communities. During 2021, we disbursed the second loan to South Africa. Again, the backdrop is the October 2020 Comprehensive Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan, which the President announced, that placed significant emphasis on generating employment under the Presidential Employment Stimulus Program. So this second $1 billion is specifically aimed at ensuring that we can generate up to 700,000 employment opportunities under that program. In short, the bank is looking forward to partner with South Africa in this journey towards greening our infrastructure and to strengthen especially the employment component of the new industries that have been referenced. South Africa has one of the highest unemployment rates, as we know, in the world. The last STATS-SA number that I've seen suggests that we have reached a record high of 34.4%. So it is very important for us to ensure that as we focus on these new industries, which have been spoken about, that we look at the employment generation capacity of those when we make these investments. Thank you very much. I'm only speaking to you now. Wonderful. So I want to just check with you, am I still on the screen, or is it possible for me to disconnect, because I am in a building where the air conditioning, it's actually still holiday here. They will be coming to close the building, and I need to negotiate with them to sort of stay as long as I need to. How long did you need me still for? You can just make 100% sure that there's no Q&A to me.
And from a Tshwane Special Economic Zone perspective, we see the potential, particularly in terms of automobile industry. We see a huge potential, because what we're worried about, Mr. President, is that if we don't actually accelerate the transition of that industry towards production of electrification over time, so that they can become cost competitive at the same fuel cell technologies, so that they can also penetrate the market over time, South Africa will be left behind. So to that extent, we've also entered into a partnership with Toyota. We're also talking to other fuel cell technology suppliers or providers, the OEMs, to see how can we accelerate and bring buses, trucks into South Africa. As Sasol, we have our own mining houses, which are using the big trucks as well and heavy duty mobility. At the same time, we also have our big trucks that we're using to transport both our chemicals as well as our fuels. So we're hoping that with a combination of the two, we can stimulate the Tshwane Economic Zone, while at the same time stimulating and assisting the commercial transportation to accelerate the heavy-duty mobility. So we've prioritized the entry corridor, and we're working together with those partners. Lastly, we see Ekurhuleni as one other special economic zone, and as part of that Ekurhuleni, the OR Tambo Airport is quite critical. So we want to ensure that South Africa can become a sustainable aviation hub as the world transition towards energy sources. Earlier on, President, he spoke about advantages, including our innovation over time and 7 decades of our Fischer-Tropsch technology in Sasol that puts us at the heart of the transition and to be able to drive that transition and support sustainable aviation fuel. We've seen the recent announcement this week of IATA in terms of where they're shifting towards decarbonizing the aviation industry. So as Sasol would like to play into that space. Then the second pillar is around export, which we've spoken a lot about. I'm not going to touch a lot on that. From an export perspective, I think there's quite exciting opportunities, particularly in the Western Cape and Northern Cape, that are really positioned well in terms of infrastructure, but also in terms of the derivatives that we're seeing, particularly when you look at endowments of renewables, and that coupled with Sasol experiences over time and our ability to be able to have very good trading partners globally. We do believe we can play a critical role on that. All of this, Mr. President, we don't think that Sasol can play alone. It's actually a broader industry-led, as I've already mentioned in South Africa, to incubate the local hub. We are talking to a number of commercial partners as well as industries. On the export market as well, it is important that we integrate all of these potentials, because for us, particularly as we enter the market and compete with countries like Chile and Australia, we will need to ensure that we are actually more cost competitive. So certain enablers to do that will be to produce hydrogen at scale. So we have to really prioritize those hubs that we've identified, and we're excited about the Buchabaya project and equally excited about Namibia. The proximity of Northern Cape and Namibia gives us a huge advantage for us to integrate the two regions and ensure that we can maximize on scale and accelerate the cost reductions as well. On the other hand, there are other potentials such as Skucha. When I was looking at the map that talks about the diverse disparity that we're still seeing between the developed regions and the undeveloped, there is a huge potential as well to unlock green hydrogen in areas such as Skucha, Saldanha Bay going forward as well, and as Sasol we can play a role with partners. So in a nutshell, that's really what we are looking for. We're excited about this, but it will require a clear strategy. It will require investment in infrastructure, whether we're talking about upgrading the airport, the port infrastructure or new port infrastructures going forward. It will also require incentives, particularly in the beginning when the business cases are not sound and we're trying to penetrate and create the transition. So we do believe that carbon tax can play a bigger role and be utilized as an incentive to accelerate the decarbonization in a meaningful manner while also ensuring just transition and ensuring that we can actually unlock value from our minerals. We can also optimize value for gas in the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Ardendorf, I owe you an apology. You are doing a presentation for us on possible futures for South Africa's infrastructure. Can I ask you to please make your way to this podium and give us that presentation? No worries, thanks.
Your Excellency, Honorable Ramaphosa, and our leadership, Honorable Ministers and Deputy Ministers, dignitaries, DGs, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. As part of the introductory, any future of infrastructure planning, especially for South Africa, comes at a much welcomed moment. As a country, we will need to constantly analyze the future of infrastructure as our priorities towards 2050 will, however, change. And, apologies, how do I move it forward? Just one, eh? How do we move this forward? Next one. My apologies. Our priorities will, however, change towards 2050, ladies and gentlemen. And our systems and structures will need to align sustainably through smart innovation, whereby we can ensure smart infrastructure business models towards 2050. As we continue to value the social impact of our draft National Infrastructure 2050 Plan decisions, we are to focus our basic needs in line with the needs of the most vulnerable of our societies. Many a time the messages come through from our people. And when we do backcasting, ladies and gentlemen, history tells us that infrastructure has an important role to play. in helping our economy get back on their feet and making the right choices. And by making those choices, ladies and gentlemen, infrastructure will help South Africa emerge even stronger. It's as simple as that. As a McKinsey report in January 2020 already affirmed, gains from infrastructure are only fully realized when projects generate tangible public benefits as we know it. Therefore, when stimulus funding is harnessed correctly and combined with new smart business models and innovative approaches, this could be the guiding star that is needed to address the large-scale and complex resilient infrastructures projects that is required for South Africa towards our immediate future. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, it's very importantly that when it comes to infrastructure and infrastructure financing, that we look at it positively. A negative thinker will always see a difficulty in every opportunity. And a positive thinker, ladies and gentlemen, will see opportunity in every difficulty. When it's raining, look for the silver lining on, in our immediate environment. When it's dark, ladies and gentlemen, let's have a look at the guiding stars. The United Nations General Assembly identified 17 Sustainable Developmental Goals, and that were adopted already in 2015. Slap bang in the middle, ladies and gentlemen, is Sustainable Developmental Goal 9, and it's about innovation and infrastructure. And Sustainable Development Goal 9 aims to build resilient infrastructure, promote sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation as we know it. The infrastructure goal has interlinkages with other sustainable developmental goals. While industrialization is connected to goal number 8, namely decent work and economic growth, Sustainable Developmental Goal 11 talks about sustainable cities and communities. Therefore, innovation and new skills development of 4I infrastructure will help realize Sustainable Developmental 2, namely zero hunger. Also, goal number 6, clean water and sanitation, as well as Sustainable Developmental Goal number 7, affordable and clean energy. We can truly see, ladies and gentlemen, that all of these Sustainable Developmental Goals has a direct impact on our Sustainable Developmental Goals number 9. So let's have a look at megatrends, ladies and gentlemen. Megatrends are global long-term change developments that impact business, economy, and cultures on both individual and societal levels as we know it. And they are combinations of multiple trends, phenomena, and issues that are intertwined with each other as we move forward in this planet Earth. So if we look at the megatrends towards 2050, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to affect the period of the National Infrastructure Plan 2050. We already see that there will be a 59% increase in food demand by 2050 alone. The World Economic Forum already indicated, ladies and gentlemen, that water crisis is a #1 global risk. We already have 90% of those world data created in the past 2 years since COVID-19 started. We already forecast that by 2022, we'll see 1 trillion objects connected in our globe towards 2022. It's argued that 47 trillion objects will be connected towards 2050. And we'll have 66% of the world connected at any time at the moment. Trust me, ladies and gentlemen, towards 2050, anything and everything will be connected, even you and I. By 2050, ladies and gentlemen, the global population will be more than 11 billion people on planet Earth. 39% of us will already be over the age of 65, up from the 8% today. So we're already seeing an aged population as we move forward. And 90% of the under 25s will live in emerging economies such as us. Currently, we're 1 billion people in Africa, just over 1 billion people in Africa, ladies and gentlemen. We will be 2 billion people towards 2050. But, very importantly, we'll have 60% of the world's youth. In other words, the people that will do the work. 1.5 million people live in our cities, or move to our cities every single week, ladies and gentlemen. And 66% live in cities by 2050%, up from 54% today. And 61% of the global GDP will be created by 750 cities, not even nations, 750 cities. So let's have a look at the mega trends towards 2030, ladies and gentlemen. The #1 mega trend will be resource scarcity. There'll be increasing strain on the planet's resources as we know it, and the increased carbon emissions drive global warming, and oil becomes increasingly the scarce resource. And the impacts that we'll actually feel, there'll be more produce, less inputs. We'll have a shift from oil to clean energy as we know it, and transformation of a carbon-based mobility, ladies and gentlemen, because we're already at the 4 hottest years that the Earth has ever seen, with 2015 and 2018. It's argued that towards 2030, ladies and gentlemen, we'll have between a 2 and a 3% increase just in temperatures. We'll have a 3% definite towards 2050, and a staggering 5.8% in Earth heat towards 2100. The second mega trend towards 2030, ladies and gentlemen, is technological breakthroughs. The pace of technological change is exponential, and data is the new oil. Data connects the world. We should never forget that. And technology increases and automates humanity. And the impacts we felt, ladies and gentlemen, is connected in intelligent life. 4IRR drives the improved lifestyles, and life is fundamentally transformed by tech. And as we know already, ladies and gentlemen, the growth of data is growing exponentially day by day. The third mega trend towards 2030, ladies and gentlemen, is social change. The global population continues to grow. We must remember, ladies and gentlemen, early 1800s, we were only 1 billion people on Earth. We're already over 7.4 billion as we move forward. And we will already be, as we know it from the previous slides, over 11 billion people on planet Earth. So there's more older people. We found in the more developed nations that the people becoming older, and it's an aged population. Hence again, for Africa, the exciting thought that 60% of the world's force will come from Africa. And the impacts that we'll feel, ladies and gentlemen, is more healthcare for the aged population globally. There'll be more food demand and diverse preferences, and nations eventually become less meaningful as we know it. The fourth mega trend towards 2030, ladies and gentlemen, is rapid urbanization. Global migration to cities are taking place as we know it. We see it in Europe, we see it all over the world taking place, and life is argued to become better in cities as we know it. We already see the growth in the Asian cities, the Tiger nations, and African mega cities, those cities with 10 million plus people live in a city. And the impacts, ladies and gentlemen, is all about smart cities, new infrastructure as we know it. And healthcare and security becomes key, and cities will eventually become more powerful than nations. What a scary thought, ladies and gentlemen. When we looked at the National Infrastructure Plan 2050, ladies and gentlemen, it became clear under Dr. Ramokgopa's leadership that he is truly taking South Africa in terms of infrastructure to the fourth level of development, where every single question was asked, is this a smart decision as we move forward? And as the President, Honorable President, were indicating, he wants a smart nation. So the true reflection was moving from a reactive more to a proactive, where the core values and co-creation was taking in consideration of our nation as we move forward. Because, ladies and gentlemen, all our efforts are and should be towards improvement, even towards 2050, with the emphasis again towards 2050. This will not just happen in the year 2050, it's every single day from tomorrow up to 2050. But as we know it, ladies and gentlemen, we need to further plan for infrastructure growth as a country, as individuals, and very importantly, as a community at large. And if you look at the different types of futures, ladies and gentlemen, and the further we look with a cone of possibilities, the further we look in time, the more we become aware of all the possibilities that's out there. We actually have to determine what is the plausible futures, what are the probable futures, but very importantly, what are the preferable futures in terms of infrastructure that we are looking for our country. And we have to cater, ladies and gentlemen, for those wild cards, those aspects that changes infrastructure industry forever. For instance, the COVID-19 that we're basically experiencing, what does global warming play in terms of that? And we truly have to consider that the National Infrastructure Plan 2050, Honourable Minister, is a working document. But constantly things are changing and happening around the world. And we have to ask ourselves and develop our foresight in terms of what seems to be happening, what's really happening, what might happen, and our strategy of the NIP 2050 What will we do and how we will do it as we move on? Very interesting, ladies and gentlemen, NIP 2050 has got 2 phases. It caters for a 30-year prognosis for our country. Very encouragingly so, because it's part and parcel of community visioning. It also gives us 3 to 4 year timelines from an immediate short-term future. And phase 2, it comes across, ladies and gentlemen, that will eventually affect every IDP. The one thing, ladies and gentlemen, that we cannot forget, we are living in the 4th industrial revolution, whether we like it or not. Have you ever asked yourself, why does it feel like the future's just getting faster and faster? We've just had Christmas, we're having Christmas again. We are constantly feeling these changes, ladies and gentlemen. Question yourself what the future role of technologies plays in our life. And hence again, that's why it feels like the future's playing faster than ever before. So let's define the 4IR. The 4IR, ladies and gentlemen, is categorized by a fusion of smart technologies. And it's blurring the lines between the physical, digital, and biological spheres, collectively referred to as the cyber-physical systems, that has a direct impact on smart business models. Even though it's green, the effect still is on smart business models, ladies and gentlemen. And the responses to technological change will determine the shape of infrastructure progress through smart business models. When we want financing, the first question is this a bankable business plan, and is this a smart business model? We already been indicated by the World Economic Forum, ladies and gentlemen, that the 4th Industrial Revolution already started in 2012. So we are already down the line, 9 years, almost 10 years down the line. So at the end of the day, the only difference with the 4IR, ladies and gentlemen, it is much more complex. We don't have the time that we had in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Industrial Revolution. The changes we as mankind can experience towards 2030 will be more so felt than the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Industrial Revolution combined. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, the degree of complexity within the 4IR, we need to focus on smart business models. And if we compare the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Industrial Revolutions, ladies and gentlemen, with the 4th, and the relevant technologies that plays a role, we can actually see why it's much more complex. And the main focus, ladies and gentlemen, is about smart business models as we know it. So the 4 primary factors that drives the 4IR, ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the day, it's these emerging catalytic technologies, these smart technologies that we're talking about. Machine learning, artificial intelligence, and how it plays a role, and a speed of change that we were talking about, those changes that we can experience towards 2030. But truly, in reality, ladies and gentlemen, it happens on a global scale. We are all in the same boat. It doesn't just happen for South Africa. We are universally in the same boat. Who has ever seen Maslow's hierarchy being graffitied by Wi-Fi? But in true reality, ladies and gentlemen, our generations, the basic human needs, we need to include Wi-Fi. So when it comes to an infrastructure, ladies and gentlemen, please think about whatever will follow Wi-Fi at the end of the day. And please Google a product called Li-Fi that will play an exponential role as we move forward. Because the main focus, ladies and gentlemen, is to get everybody connected and everything connected. In 2007, when the smartphones were developed, 4G came to the fore at 100 megabytes per second. Now we're already looking at 5G, ladies and gentlemen, with 10 gigabytes per second. We can download a movie in 3.6 seconds. Because the people that we're catering for, ladies and gentlemen, these young guns, they will not accept our old limitations. They don't. We have to live with it. We already talk about Generation Alpha, those who are being born, like my granddaughter, between 2010 and 2025. 1.5 million kids of the screens, these young guns, ladies, and are added to our global urban population every week. So, in true reality, ladies and gentlemen, as simple as it sounds, the future is not really a mystery. But when it comes to our infrastructure development, we need to cater for the societies and take demographics, in fact. We need to look at what are the new technologies, those exponential anticipated catalytic technologies that comes like lightning at the end of the day. We need to look for the supply and demand of infrastructure in our markets. We need to take the environmental aspects in consideration, and we need to plan for the new energies as we know it, and how is we as a government playing a role. The key driving technologies, ladies and gentlemen, is about energy efficiency, it's about demand-side management, smart grids in cities, convergence of IT and distribution, and falling solar prices. And the social driving forces, the people that we cater for, these millennials, ladies and gentlemen, 75% of them will be our workforce by 2025. Just over 3 years, 75% of these young guns. For them, intelligence is everything. Power of connectivity, regulation, and cheaper renewable energy. That's what they strive. For them, it's about connectivity, convergence, 3D, nanotechnology, nanobiotechnology, information, cognitive ability, and robotics. For them, it is, they want everything smart as we know it, even if it's in the middle of the ocean. Because they argue, ladies and gentlemen, the more connection there is, the more innovation, more inventions, the more opportunities they offer them. The big question then comes, how will we power a smart future as we know it? So let's look at the drivers for change, ladies and gentlemen. And these drivers of change are internal, external forces, push change forward and shape organizations and societies and markets, ladies and gentlemen. And as Darwin, when beards were still fashionable, argued, it's not the strongest of species that survived, nor the most intelligent that survived, it's the most adaptable change within its 4IR. The first driver of change, ladies and gentlemen, is the future of smart cities. And I'm going to try and speed it up as we move forward. Because smart cities are cities where there are better infrastructure, jobs, water, and food for everyone. True reality, ladies and gentlemen, the city of the future will be a 24-hour city, will be a smart city. And the future role of government, someone needs to control it. So hence, the 3 tiers of government, at some stage will have to be relooked because the pressure on the metropolitans, the pressure on the districts, municipalities, and the pressure on a national government to supply. The future of transport, ladies and gentlemen, 15,000 lives are lost on our roads every year, and it costs at 140 billion rand. And the future, ladies and gentlemen, both public and private, cannot arrive fast enough, and that future is driverless vehicles as we know it. Because already in smart cities, ladies and gentlemen, the focus is people over cars. It's argued by futurists around the world, a growing number of highways designated as driverless vehicles only. Have you ever tried to think what a driverless car must see with all its sensors, ladies and gentlemen? It's mind-boggling. Hence again, what we argue, that anything and everything will be connected in the future. Our president calls for smart rail. We need to ensure that we can incorporate, because futurists around the world also argue that a form of tube transportation, inspired by Hyperloop and ET3, will be well on its way becoming the world's largest infrastructure project. We are already talking about automated trucks, ladies and gentlemen, driverless automated trucks as we know it. Future of energy, ladies and gentlemen, South Africa's a new energy plan that covers 2019 to 2030. We need to position ourselves in terms of that. And the future of energy, ladies and gentlemen, from a futurist perspective, will be solar. When binary and fusionary power plays a big role, have a look at exactly what Elon Musk and them are striving for. Solar will become the plurality of energy, renewable energy. Because futurists already argue that 30% of our cities on our planet will operate the electric utilities as microgrids as we know it. So true reality, ladies, is the fifth driver change the future of water. Because at the end of the day, based on current usage trends, my apologies, South Africa is expected to face a water deficit by 17%. We're already experiencing, ladies and gentlemen, the droughts. And future wars will be fought over the future of water. Consider that fact. But let me introduce you the aqua solar desalination plants. Ladies and gentlemen, it's argued globally that it's a circular economy game changer. So aqua solar plants that's powered by renewable energy, ladies and gentlemen, is an absolute game changer that we have to incorporate in our country. The future of digital infrastructure, ladies and gentlemen, it's a no-brainer as we move forward. And futurists around the world argue that by 2030, it will be common to use next-generation search engines to search the physical world. This is where we determine our future mines. Our mines are too old. This is where we determine where agriculture and our maize needs to be planted, ladies and gentlemen. And the seventh driver change the future human settlements, because our apartheid spatial planning patterns of social exclusion brought this driver of change so forward for us. These are 12 double-story, double-story low-cost housing, 3D printed in China 2 years ago already, ladies and gentlemen. When it comes to our low-cost housing, they come at a third of the cost, and they've got a 100-year guarantee. So it's something that we have to look into for our mix moving forward. 2 minutes, understand. All right. Very important, ladies and gentlemen, we need to look at the future of space infrastructure, because the second biggest world war that the world will see is all about space. China has already positioned themselves on the dark side of the moon, because what it basically does, ladies and gentlemen, it'll give us data at lower cost, greater access to data, opportunities for emerging countries, and boost the startups and greater transparency and decision. So, and truly, ladies and gentlemen, my apologies for rushing through this. I was originally given 30 minutes. It's been cut down. But, Honourable Minister, the NIP 2050 is in good hands. We've observed it. Honourable President, we firmly believe in the positivity that NIP 2050 will give us towards the future. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks, Professor Arendorff. I'm going to open the floor to questions shortly when there will be roving mics. So when you do have a question after we speak to Mr. Taukobong, you must please raise your hand and let us know who you're addressing the question to. Thanks so much for your time today. What role should frontier technologies and ICT sector play in reviving the economy, not only during COVID-19, but also with the climate challenges that we're facing?
Thank you very much for your question. His Excellency our President, ministers here present. The difficulty with speaking after a futurist is that it makes your answers look old. But I will try. I think this key thing for us is the impact of climate change and COVID has really defined the way we do business. It's no longer about business as usual, but it's the business unusual. And how do we perform in a business unusual? I think what's key in terms of context of what we're discussing today, infrastructure and infrastructure development plays a critical role in ensuring that technology can be enabled and should enable all the connectivities that is required for us to go into the future. I think what's also important is the policies and reforms that we write today, whilst addressing the issues of today, should make sure that they do not block or limit the opportunities of those who will follow for us. So it's about really how do you have futuristic looking type policy. I think it's no argument that technology has played a big role. I think as the Prof has said, connectivity is a key driver to say how do we open up the country. I think curriculum we've talked about the rural-urban divide is also about the digital divide. How do we make sure that more people have more significant access to faster internet speeds in far more deeper rural areas? I think COVID caught us quite unaware, but the industry, the telecoms industry, working with the ministry and working also with the regulator, was able to respond quite quickly with temporary spectrum, so that at least we could provide access to education, to digital education, and for people working at home. And it said, how do we then take this current framework and way of thinking and cooperating as an industry to make sure that we lead the country into the digital divide? 5G, many countries have actually defined, or many governments have actually defined 5G as a critical strategy as part of the economic development plan. Just the recent behaviors we've seen, especially in the UK, where 2 years after 5G launch, they spent about 11 billion in investing in the infrastructure. I think Korea spent about $15 billion in investing in the strategy. It's key for us to say it's not just 5G as an enabler from telecoms perspective, but how is 5G changing all economies, from mining to agriculture? How are we using 5G to make sure that we include the whole ecosystem, from SMEs to young entrepreneurs? And I think the most important part is, I think as a prof said then, what's often been said is 4G changed lives. 5G is going to change societies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just want to check if anybody has any questions for any of our panelists on the floor. If you could raise your hand so that a roving mic can be brought to you. If that happens, if Perfect. Are there any questions from the floor at the moment? Not yet, so we'll continue our discussion online. Mr. Maslow, perhaps I'll bring you back in. I know you've touched on the issue a little bit, but talk to us about how much of the approved project for financing by the NDB are going to fit in with the initiatives of NIP 2050, and how are they going to do this? Leslie Marsdorp, I'm just checking that you're still there in Beijing. Perhaps we'll bring it back into the room, then we'll go back to the IDC. It's been a while since we've spoken to you. What's the importance of future-focused projects like we've been speaking about? And also, what role do black industrialists specifically play in this vision?
Yeah, thank you. I think what's important, and from an IDC point of view, is that we are mandated to drive industrial capacity in South Africa. And whenever we look at infrastructure investment decisions, we are asking ourselves what infrastructure is required now to facilitate and enable the current industrial base to expand, but most importantly, to transform. And along those lines, we want to see more active involvement and participation in projects in the economy by historically disadvantaged individuals, as well as we want to see inclusive growth in communities. We want to see inclusion of workers in the various companies and empowerment structures. So transformation is key for us. Inclusivity is key for us. I think what we have seen with elements of post-unrest, with the key social challenges of poverty, inequality, and unemployment, is that we need to accelerate some of these initiatives, whether it's through black industrialists, it's through community participation, or it's through workers, but it must be visible and it must be tangible. So what do we then do as the IDC? If we look at renewable energy projects, over the years, over the last 10 years, since the start of the IPP office in 2010-2011, we've invested at cost 14 billion rands, which today at market value has probably more than doubled. And a lot of that investment was geared towards community participants and BE participants across the different bidding rounds. Now that the private sector has been enabled by the Honorable President's announcement of the 100 megawatts dispensation, we are now saying as a value add to private sector, especially mining companies and manufacturing companies, when you look at your projects, solar, wind, wherever you want to locate them close to the communities, we will be there to help you structure the investments. We will be there to fund so that we lessen the burden on your balance sheet for broadening participation. Although you should not see it as a burden, because investments in communities ensures social security. So it's about social redress, it's about inclusivity, it's about making sure that the pattern of ownership are transformed in the economy. And that's what we want to seek to drive aggressively as we proceed. And of course, lastly, we want to support the government's district development model. So where we invest, whether we're looking at special economic zones, we need to make sure that there's equity, there's fair development distribution across the country. But lastly, key to all of what we do is partnerships with strategic partners such as SASOL, such as many other companies that we work with in the country. Because we realize as the IDC, we are just a financier, we're not a strategic operator of assets, we are not specialists in development, but we will use the government's assets and the balance sheet to help drive development and transformation, and to fund high-risk areas, which hopefully will attract private sector funding in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Mabelane, what possible changes could we see and experience in terms of infrastructure towards 2050? I know the professors talked about it a little bit. Just give us your insight into that.
I'm going to be a bit selfish and focus more on SIDSSA. So I'll mention a few things. I think first of all, as we've transitioned towards our ambition of net zero by 2050, we intend to do it in a thoughtful manner, particularly as Secunda. And our intention with that is to make sure that we can continuously convert Secunda into sustainable aviation fuels over time, as well as sustainable chemicals. And when we look at it, we actually have already advantage assets, a significant part of our assets we can repurpose. So as we're looking into it, I think some of the requests that we'll have to the President and the ministers is infrastructure, particularly with regard to the grid connectivity, because it's quite critical that we are able to get renewable sources from the Northern Cape, coastal, to be able to transmit that to the inland market, where the biggest market is. It will help us with Secunda. In addition, hydrogen pipelines and infrastructure is going to be important. As we think about projects like Kuga, as well as Namibia, we could actually get hydrogen inland where the demand is going to be. So that will then enable us to start producing at scale over time as costs become more and more competitive in Secunda. But at the back of that is equally important that we understand the skills that are required, the enablement that are required, and also how do we create manufacturing of components. I think our worry at this stage is that we don't necessarily have an integrated plan to really ensure that we can actually utilize this transition to generate small enterprises at scale that can scale up over time. There are quite a few incubations that we know that the IDC is supporting, and as SIDSSA we are committed to that, particularly in terms of fuel cells technology, as well as on the renewable side. So that's one part of the biggest changes you'll see. From Sasolburg, which is one of our exciting facilities as well, we're excited. We're going to be the first to produce hydrogen in South Africa, probably. We're tending to produce hydrogen of about 60 megawatts there by 2023, and we'll utilize that to incubate the industries that I was talking about. And we are already working with some global partners, Linde, as well as Enertrox, to look at sustainable aviation so that we can actually play in the opportunity that I've mentioned globally for sustainable aviation fuel. And we do know that others are looking into it. As I said, it's a partnership. We need to integrate the capability and the small industries that this could actually create and have a master plan to unlock value from manufacturing.
Thank you. Mr. Takubong, what are the key considerations for SIDSSA to grow and protect critical infrastructure for the digital economy?
Thank you for the question. I think what's critical for us is noting that we do have extensive infrastructure. There's also important to maintain whilst we grow it. And I'll use the telecoms industry as an example. Telkom alone, in our last financial year, spent over 8 billion rand in infrastructure. The other competitors collectively spent about 20 to 25 billion rand altogether. One of the biggest issues that we face on a constant and a daily process is battery theft and vandalism of core equipment. So it's really important for us to ensure that as we invest in this infrastructure, we create the right ecosystem for that the people who are meant to be served by the infrastructure are able to actually engage in the maintenance, the monitoring, the growth of that ecosystem. Because it's one thing to upgrade infrastructure without upgrading the surroundings of the people, without addressing poverty, without addressing education, without addressing the needs why people feel to vandalize infrastructure. So the key thing for us is the growth of infrastructure must be strongly supported with maintenance, as well as protecting those key core assets like rail, like base stations, like transportation. Thank you.
Let's try and bring in Mr. Leslie Marsdorp again from Beijing. A very good afternoon to you, if you can still hear us. I was just trying to find out about the approved projects that you have for financing. How many of those are going to fit into the objectives of the NIP 2050, and how are they going to do so?
The New Development Bank, like all external finance agencies, other multilateral banks, we, as I mentioned earlier on, most of our projects are sovereign guaranteed, which means by definition, these are not projects which we as a bank initiate. They come in partnership with government, with institutions like the Development Bank of Southern Africa or the IDC, in other words, state-owned enterprises. Almost all of our projects, in fact, 100% of the projects that we have as a sovereign portfolio are ones that form part of the government's 2050 agenda. Reference was made earlier on to South Africa being water scarce. As you know, Gauteng, which is the economic heartland of South Africa, will experience water scarce conditions over the next decade, decade and a half. We are in the final stages now of approving the second phase, the building of new additional dams in Lesotho Islands Water Project Phase 2, which is a project that the bank has been looking at over the last few years. We're in the final stages of that particular one. We are also, as was mentioned earlier on, the energy grid in South Africa, which is still substantially coal-based, requires huge investments in greening and having a more appropriate energy mix as envisaged in the integrated energy plan. So we will devote considerable resources, especially to that effort to bring in more renewable sources of power. And in that endeavor, we will be working closely with the private sector, with independent power producers. The final point I'd like to make also relates to the point around smart cities. We have a number of smart city initiatives, both in China as well as in India. We are now very keen to see how we can replicate some of the best practices across the BRICS countries. Reference was made by a number of people now, also, for example, to the green hydrogen industry. China is already playing a very leading role in that. So we want to see the extent to which we can replicate these best practices across the various BRICS countries, and in that way, bring these to scale rather than each country having their own projects in that sense.
This country forward. And trust me, ladies and gentlemen, our infrastructure our core infrastructure in South Africa is not so bad. Not like what people make. We're still better off than 70% of the world's nations. So, but it's very importantly, and I have no doubt that we need to focus on public-private partnerships. I know National Treasury doesn't believe in it for whatever reason, but you cannot move within a fourth industrial revolution, and you cannot finance projects moving forward unless you bring in public-private partnerships.
Mr. Takubong, what are the prospects for 5G in reviving the global economy and digital economy, and what lessons can be drawn from other countries around the world, as Professor is speaking about as well?
Yeah, like I said, I think 5G, in terms of the numbers being thrown around, it's not just about changing lives, like I said, but about changing societies. And I think the impact of 5G is that it's not just a telecommunications play, but it's actually an industry-wide play. So from farming to manufacturing to automated moves, as we've just spoken. So I think the impact that's being thrown around is, it's estimated that in the next 10 to 15 years, it will be about 35% of the global GDP will be driven out of 5G, creating over 380 million jobs worldwide. So I think if you look at some of the elements that Prof have been touched about on education, on especially new age technology like the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, big data, 5G is a critical enabler for this. But I think equally what's important, if I may wear a telco hat, infrastructure is going to be key for 5G. Just if you look at 4G right now, our normal networks run on about 20,000 base stations across South Africa. When 5G comes, you need to multiply that by 3 or 4 in terms of the number of cells to operate 5G. And infrastructure is going to be quite critical to that bit, because the more 5G you have, the more fiber is going to be required to make sure that high quality backhaul is there to provide that 5G experience. And that's something that Telkom has been working on quite furiously over the past few years.
All right, we're almost at the end of our session. I'm just going to check once again if there are any questions from the floor. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. There is somebody who will come to you with a roving mic. While we're waiting to see if there are any questions on the floor in the chat, Akona Tinta has a comment for us. Interesting perspective. There is a need for mind shift in addressing backlogs in rural municipalities, utilizing smart solutions for socioeconomic infrastructure development. It's more urgent than before for public infrastructure investment to be central in realization of the long-term plan and in line with the objectives of the district development model. I don't know if anybody would like to respond to that comment from Akona Tinta. Professor Adendorp?
Thank you for that. It's more like a comment. I firmly believe that the one districts model is a great solution for South Africa. I think it integrates most of what needs to be done. I do believe the one districts model caters for our future. There's no two ways about it. And what was encouraging in terms of the NIP 2050, it dovetails beautifully with the one districts model, which is highly encouraging, because we always need the golden thread going through true development at the end of the day. So yes, in true reality, the lady is correct. One districts model, I know there's some people give some negative comments on it. I'm firmly a firm believer that is what South Africa needed. We needed to bring foresight into it, and particularly in our rural areas and our districts, municipalities, and those kind of aspects, because we need to create hope for our people, and so that the trust at the end of the day, catering for the future generations, actually comes through. Thank you very much.
All right, Ms. Wabelane, this is a comment that's come up quite a lot, is the importance of public-private partnerships when we're looking at infrastructure. Talk to us more on that.
I think it's been, is it me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, I missed that. It's been re-emphasized a lot by the professor, and I suppose that the examples that SIDSSA has shared today in partnership with a number of state-owned entities, whether we're talking about the IDC, the Central Energy Fund, both on the gas side as well as on the hydrogen side, demonstrates the value that we can actually unlock over time if we partner and bring the multiple skill set that government has in partnership with the private sector. At the same time, when we look at the Buchabai project, it is going to stimulate quite a number of initiatives to stimulate economic activities in the Northern Cape, and that requires a partnership as well with different sectors within government. But at the same time, on the private sector, we will be pulling a number of players, from technology developers, green funders, global players, particularly international players with as an example, we've just entered into an MOA with the Port of Rotterdam, and that is also the back of the relationship and partnership that they've already formed with government. That will enable us to be able to tap into their platform and be able to complete commercial arrangements, particularly off-take arrangements, that are going to be quite critical to get funding of that project. So it does demonstrate that it's actually more a coherent partnership at a local level, regional, and also in terms of international players with state and also the companies of South Africa. From a SASL perspective, this plays to our strength of innovating for a better world in terms of our purpose, and our 7 decades of formation when SASL was formed by the state to actually innovate and come up with energy solutions for South Africa. So we're keen to play and partner with government, and we're really grateful, Mr. President, for the opportunity and the confidence that government and the state-owned entities are continuing to show in SASL.
All right. As we wrap up the discussion, because I see that there's a very quiet audience with us today, not a lot of questions from the floor, I'd like to wrap off with you, Mr. Tokbong. The Telkom says, as a member of the Southern African Telecommunications Association, what are the regional CEOs' broadband initiatives aimed at regional economic cooperation? Because that's also very important.
Thank you. It's quite a very important conference to be part of. I think it's the Southern African Telecoms Association. I think we had our last conference before COVID in Mauritius. It's predominantly the fixed line operators in Southern Africa. And Telkom has been quite pivotal in making sure that we're doing a lot of knowledge transfer, making sure that we're signing quite a lot of bilaterals, especially to drive even pricing and roaming pricing within the region. There's also a lot of cooperation in support of the 4IR for SA. I think a lot of the members in the region were actually invited to that launch we had about 2 years ago, Mr. President. So we also play a role not just in South Africa, but also in Southern Africa with the fixed line operators.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you all to our panelists, to the people who are watching us online on YouTube for your comments as well. Thank you so much for that. Let's just give you some responses to the panel that we've had. Devak Infrastructure says that's very insightful. We would like to collaborate with SIDSSA. Gino Del Fava says, well done, Professor Ardendorf. Casey Modawa says, IDC speaks of inclusivity, but multi-corporal agencies still hold the upper hand. And then Gino Del Fava saying the patterns of ownership must be transformed. I believe in the concept of sharing can lead to more equitable redistribution of the wealth generated in our country. So those are some of the comments from the people watching us online. Thank you so much for that. Just a few announcements before we go to an early break. The plenary sessions will be taking place from 2 o'clock. So from now on until 2 is lunchtime. Panels 1 to 4 are on level 2 and panel 5 is on level 4. If you have any tickets that you need validated, please go to the ushers either here or on level 0. They will validate those parking vouchers for you. Lunch will be served in the ballroom foyer on level 2. Thanks so much for your time and attention. See you at 2 o'clock. What are you guys?
I would definitely like to for us